She was dying in the same fortress where her brothers vanished 20 years earlier. Down the hall, her 11-year-old son Henry presses his face to a cold stone wall, listening to his mother's screams. He doesn't know it yet, but he's about to lose the only person who will ever love him unconditionally. Elizabeth of York just gave birth to her 7th child. The baby lived just 9 days. Elizabeth follows her into death, but her passing left behind more than grief. It left behind mysteries that still haunt English history. Why did Elizabeth marry Henry Tudor, the enemy of her bloodline? Was it for peace, survival, or revenge? And when Henry later executed her own cousin to secure his crown, why did she remain loyal to him until her last breath? Did she take to her grave the truth about her murdered brothers, the princes in the Tower? And why did her son, Henry VIII, spend his entire life searching for another woman just like his mother, and destroy everyone who failed him? This is the tragic, chilling, and unforgettable story of Elizabeth of York, the only woman Henry VIII ever truly loved.
If this tragedy already pulls you in, give this video a like. It helps his story reach more eyes.
Elizabeth of York was born on February 11th, 1466 at Westminster Palace. Her father, Edward IV, had just seized the throne after years of civil war. Her mother, Elizabeth Woodville, was England's most hated queen. But this baby girl carried something special, the power to end 30 years of bloodshed. Edward IV ruled the House of York, their enemy, the House of Lancaster. White roses against red roses, brother against brother. England bled while these families fought over the crown. Little Princess Elizabeth grew up like a chess piece. Winchester, Greenwich, Westminster, always moving, always guarded. Her childhood games included learning which relatives might murder her father. When she was 3, soldiers drowned her Uncle George in wine. When she was 5, enemies stuck her grandfather's head on a spike. When she was 7, her mother grabbed gold and jewels, fleeing to Westminster Abbey while armies clashed outside. This wasn't a fairy tale childhood. This was war. 1470 brought the worst terror yet. Elizabeth's father lost his throne. Enemy soldiers stormed London. The 4-year-old princess watched her pregnant mother pack frantically. They ran to Westminster Abbey and claimed sanctuary, medieval hiding where even kings couldn't reach. Elizabeth spent months on Abbey's stone floors, eating scraps, wondering if soldiers would smash down doors. Her baby brother Edward was born there, future Edward V, one of the vanished princes. Something happened in that abbey that changed Elizabeth forever, something that would poison how she raised her own son decades later. 9 months later, her father reclaimed his throne. Elizabeth returned to palace life, but different now. She understood crowns vanish overnight. Family becomes enemy. Survival means outsmarting everyone. Her education began: reading, writing, French, Latin, needlework, and dancing. But her real schooling came from watching parents navigate court snakes. Her father was handsome, charming, ruthless when needed. Her mother was clever, ambitious, and absolutely devoted to her children's survival. Young Princess Elizabeth learned to read faces, listen to whispers, smile sweetly while remembering every threat. She'd need these skills sooner than anyone imagined.
April 9th, 1483. King Edward IV dies suddenly, at 40. Princess Elizabeth is 17. Her 12-year-old brother Edward becomes King Edward V. Everything should be simple. Instead, everything explodes. Their uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, becomes Lord Protector. He should protect young King Edward until he's ready to rule alone. Richard seems trustworthy. He's fought loyally for Edward IV for years. But within weeks, trust shattered. Richard intercepts the young king heading to London. He arrests Elizabeth's uncle and half-brother, then demands Elizabeth's mother surrender her younger son, 9-year-old Richard. Elizabeth's mother refuses. She knows something terrible is brewing. She grabs Elizabeth and her daughters, fleeing to Westminster Abbey again, the same sanctuary that saved them before. But this time feels different, darker, like watching a wolf circle sheep. Richard surrounds the abbey with armed guards. No one enters or leaves without permission. He publicly promises to protect his nephews. He'll keep them safe in the tower until the coronation. Everyone believes him. The tower isn't just prison. It's royal palace where kings traditionally stay. Elizabeth's mother finally agrees. She makes Richard swear a holy oath on sacred relics that no harm will come to the boys. He swears. Then comes the announcement that shatters everything. Richard claims Edward IV's marriage was invalid. All Edward's children are bastards with no crown rights. He, Richard, is now rightful King Richard III. This was the Abbey moment that poisoned Elizabeth forever. She realized words mean nothing. Oaths are wind. Only power matters. This lesson would twist how she raised Henry VIII, teaching him that kings trust no one completely, must always expect betrayal. The two princes disappear from the tower. No announcement, no bodies, no explanation. One day they're playing in gardens, next day, gone. Elizabeth knows her brothers are dead. Everyone knows. Richard murdered 2 children for a crown. Now Elizabeth faces a choice determining England's future. Accept defeat, live quietly as Richard's bastard niece, maybe marry some minor lord and fade away, or do something never attempted, unite with her family's greatest enemies, the Lancastrians, and destroy the man who butchered her brothers. She chooses revenge. But revenge demands ultimate sacrifice. She must marry Henry Tudor, a stranger whose family fought hers for decades. Henry has almost no throne claim. He's been exiled for 14 years. No army, no money, no English support. He has one thing. He's the last Lancastrian male breathing. The plan forms in shadows. Elizabeth's mother and Margaret Beaufort, Henry's mother, exchange secret messages through a Welsh doctor. If Henry can kill Richard and take the throne, he'll marry Elizabeth of York. Their children will unite Red Rose with White Rose. The wars will finally end. Christmas Day, 1483, in Rennes Cathedral, France, Henry Tudor swears publicly to marry Elizabeth of York when he becomes England's king. But Elizabeth is trapped in Westminster Abbey. Richard controls her completely. One wrong message risks her life. Then Richard makes an offer terrifying everyone. He invites Elizabeth and her sisters to leave the sanctuary and return to court, promises to treat them well, find good husbands, and restore their positions. Elizabeth's mother doesn't trust him. She knows Richard murdered her sons. Why show mercy to daughters? But they have no choice. After months in sanctuary, they're starving. Richard cut off supplies. In March 1484, Elizabeth leaves Westminster Abbey, returning to Richard III's court. What happens next shocks everyone in England.
Elizabeth of York walks back into the royal court once belonging to her father. Now, Uncle Richard III sits on the throne meant for her dead brother. The same man who murdered those brothers smiles and welcomes her home. She's 18 and completely alone, but Elizabeth learned something crucial during sanctuary months: how to wear masks. She smiles at Richard, thanks him for his kindness, acts like a grateful niece instead of a grieving sister. Inside, she's planning his destruction. Richard treats Elizabeth too well. Beautiful gowns, jewels, place of honor at court. At Christmas 1484, she wears clothes nearly matching Queen Anne Neville's. People whisper that Richard treats his niece like second queen. Then Queen Anne falls ill. Whispers become rumors. Terrible, scandalous rumors. Is King Richard III planning to marry his own niece? The idea horrifies everyone. Marrying your brother's daughter was medieval incest. But Richard is 32, with no sons. His only child died in 1484. He needs heirs desperately. Elizabeth of York is young, beautiful, fertile, carries York blood, legitimizing his rule. If he marries her and she bears sons, no one can challenge his dynasty. Elizabeth knows something about Richard no one else suspects, something making his marriage proposal even more twisted than it appears. First, she must survive Queen Anne's suspicions. Anne isn't stupid. She sees how Richard looks at Elizabeth, watches him favor niece over wife. Anne knows she's dying, but also knows what Richard plans after her death. Anne Neville dies March 16, 1485. Timing seems suspicious. Natural illness? Or did someone help her along? Within days, rumors explode. Richard III will marry Elizabeth of York, king and niece, uncle and brother's daughter. Perfect political solution and perfect moral scandal. Elizabeth says nothing publicly. Privately, she's terrified. Marrying Richard would destroy her secret alliance with Henry Tudor, make her complicit in her brother's murders, trap her forever with the man who destroyed her family. But refusing might mean death. Richard's advisors are horrified. Supporters threaten abandonment. The church condemns it as sinful. Even Richard's mother reportedly opposes the match. Faced with opposition, Richard publicly denies marriage intentions. But denials sound hollow. Everyone knows he needs a wife and heir. Elizabeth is England's most valuable bride. Here's what Elizabeth knew, making Richard's proposal so twisted. She suspected he didn't just kill her brothers for the throne. She suspected he killed them because he wanted to marry her. That even in 1483, Richard was already planning to make his 17-year-old niece his queen. The murders weren't just about power, they were about possession. This realization fills Elizabeth with such rage, she makes a secret vow. If Henry Tudor lands in England, she'll do everything possible to help destroy Richard III. But she must be careful. One wrong move, and she disappears like her brothers. Summer 1485 brings disturbing news. Henry Tudor is gathering an army in France, planning to invade England and claim the throne. Richard knows invasion is coming, starts preparing for war. Richard doesn't trust Elizabeth completely anymore. He sends her north to Sheriff Hutton Castle with her sisters and cousins. Officially for safety during coming war, unofficially to keep her from potential rescuers. She's essentially a prisoner in a comfortable cage. But Elizabeth has played a longer game than anyone realizes. All those months at Richard's court, she wasn't just surviving, she was gathering information, learning Richard's weaknesses, identifying which nobles might turn against him. Now she waits for Henry Tudor to land and start the final battle.
August 7th, 1485. Henry Tudor lands at Milford Haven, Wales, with 2,000 men. Most are French mercenaries, barely speaking English. Henry's been exiled 14 years, never commanded armies, never lived in adult England. This should be suicide. Richard III has larger army, better generals, home advantage. He's experienced soldier who helped his brother win multiple battles. Henry Tudor is gambling with terrible odds. But Henry has something Richard doesn't, a promise. The promise to marry Elizabeth of York and unite warring houses. That promise is everything. Without it, Henry has no real claim to the throne. He's just another rebel with foreign soldiers. As Henry marches through Wales, men join his army. Not thousands, but enough. They're not fighting for Henry personally. Most never heard of him. They're fighting for Elizabeth of York. They're fighting for the idea that she'll marry Henry and bring peace. The red rose and white rose united in marriage. Without Elizabeth's name behind him, Henry would have no English supporters at all. Richard III panics. He's expected this invasion for months, but now realizes how weak his position really is. Yes, he has more soldiers, but how many are truly loyal? How many might switch sides if battle goes badly? He makes a desperate decision. He writes to Elizabeth of York at Sheriff Hutton. We don't have the actual letter, but know what it said. Richard offered to marry Elizabeth immediately if she'd publicly denounce Henry Tudor and support Richard's throne claim. Her royal blood, combined with his military strength, could crush Henry's rebellion before it began. Elizabeth's response changes English history forever. She refuses Richard's offer. This refusal seals Richard's fate. If Elizabeth had accepted Richard, Henry Tudor would be dead within weeks. No English nobles would support a foreign pretender against the rightful Yorkist princess and her husband. But Elizabeth says no. She chooses Henry Tudor, a man she's never met, over Richard III, who murdered her brothers. Meanwhile, two armies move toward each other. Richard marches from Nottingham with perhaps 8,000 men. Henry approaches from west with maybe 5,000. They'll meet at Bosworth Field in Leicestershire. August 22nd, 1485. Battle of Bosworth begins at dawn. Richard arranges his army on Ambion Hill, holding high ground. Henry's forces spread in valley below. Odds still heavily favor Richard. But something extraordinary happens. Mid-battle, key supporters abandon Richard. Sir William Stanley, commanding large force, suddenly attacks Richard's army from behind. The Stanleys had been neutral, waiting to see which side would win. Now they're betting everything on Henry Tudor. Why do they choose Henry now? Because Elizabeth of York chose him first. The Stanleys know whoever marries Elizabeth will rule England. Since Elizabeth supports Henry, they support Henry too. Richard III sees his army collapsing. He makes final, desperate charge directly at Henry Tudor. If he can kill the pretender personally, rebellion dies with him. Richard almost reaches Henry. For moments, entire future of England balances on sword blows between two men claiming the crown. Then Richard falls. Last Plantagenet king dies in Bosworth mud, his crown rolling into thorn bushes. Henry Tudor won impossible victory, but only because Elizabeth of York made it possible. At Sheriff Hutton, Elizabeth receives the news. Richard III is dead. Henry Tudor is the king. Here's what Elizabeth felt for Henry no one expected. Nothing. She'd agreed to marry him for political reasons, for revenge on Richard, to unite kingdoms. But she didn't love him. She'd never met him. How could she love a complete stranger? But when Bosworth news reached Sheriff Hutton, Elizabeth realized something surprising her. She was relieved. Not just because Richard was dead, but because Henry kept his promise to come for her. In a world where promises meant nothing, Henry Tudor risked everything to honor his word. Maybe this marriage wouldn't be about love, but it might be built on something rarer: trust. She has no idea that Henry Tudor is about to break her trust.
October 30th, 1485, Westminster Abbey. Henry Tudor is crowned King Henry VII of England. Elizabeth of York watches from congregation, expecting to be crowned queen beside him as he promised. She isn't. Henry crowns himself alone. Elizabeth sits with other nobles, shock and hurt flooding her face. This isn't what he promised. This isn't the partnership he swore they have. This is Henry's great betrayal of Elizabeth's trust. Before Bosworth, he promised to marry Elizabeth immediately after victory. He swore she would be his queen, his partner, his equal. Now he's king, and everything changes. Henry doesn't marry Elizabeth immediately. For months, he delays. Why? Because marrying Elizabeth admits his throne claim is weak. He wants Parliament to confirm his right to rule by conquest first, then strengthen through marriage second. He's rewriting history, pretending he won the crown by himself, not because Elizabeth chose him over Richard. Politically smart, but personally cruel. She's not queen. She's not even promised queen. Elizabeth waits, not knowing if Henry will keep his promise or find more advantageous bride. Finally, papal dispensation arrives from Rome. Henry and Elizabeth are distant cousins, both descended from Edward III, so they need church permission. January 18th, 1486. The wedding finally happens at Westminster Abbey. Elizabeth wears white silk with crimson and gold trim. Every thread sends messages: York white, Lancaster red, royal gold. She's 19 and about to become England's most important queen. But what kind of marriage will this be? They barely know each other. He fought for crown, she was born to it. He grew up in exile, she in palaces. He learned to trust no one. She discovered that her trust was worthless to him. But after marriage, Henry treats Elizabeth with respect and genuine affection. He's not handsome like her father, but he's intelligent, careful, utterly devoted to making their marriage work. He understands Elizabeth legitimizes his rule in ways victory alone never could. More importantly, Henry listens to Elizabeth's advice about English customs and court politics. He's been away 14 years. She knows which nobles can be trusted, which hold grudges, how to navigate complex relationships determining political success. Slowly, they become true partners ruling England. September 20th, 1486. Elizabeth gives birth to their first child at Winchester, chosen deliberately to connect their dynasty with Arthurian legends. The baby is a son, healthy despite being born early. They name him Arthur. England rejoices. The Tudor rose produced an heir. The wars are truly over. But Elizabeth's real triumph isn't Arthur. It's what she creates around him. She establishes a new queenship model, balancing political influence with maternal devotion. She attends council meetings when asked, but never publicly challenges Henry's decisions. She manages royal household, oversees children's education, builds relationships with foreign courts. Most importantly, she makes the Tudor court magnificent in ways impressing foreign ambassadors and English nobles. She understands royal power depends partly on royal spectacle. Her coronation features 50 courses at a banquet. Her clothing budget rivals Renaissance princes. This isn't vanity, it's statecraft. Over the next 16 years, Elizabeth bears 6 more children. Margaret in 1489, who'll marry Scotland's king. Henry in 1491, future Henry VIII. Elizabeth in 1492, who dies as toddler. Mary in 1496. Edmund in 1499, dying within a year. Catherine in 1503, living only days. 4 children reach adulthood. In an age when childhood death is common, this represents remarkable success. Elizabeth proves herself excellent mother, taking personal interest in children's education and welfare. One of these children will grow up believing his mother was perfect. He'll spend his entire life trying to find another woman matching her memory, destroying anyone falling short. But Elizabeth's greatest challenge isn't childbearing or court politics. It's dealing with pretenders to Henry's throne, men claiming to be her dead brothers, returned from the grave to reclaim their birthright.
In 1487, a boy named Lambert Simnel claimed to be her cousin Edward, Earl of Warwick. The claim is easily disproven. Real Edward is alive in the Tower, but enough nobles support Simnel to force Henry into battle at Stoke Field. More dangerous is Perkin Warbeck, appearing 1490, claiming to be Richard, Duke of York, Elizabeth's younger brother, supposedly murdered in the Tower. Warbeck is handsome, charming, knows details about the royal family, making his claim believable. Foreign courts accept him as rightful king. Scotland's James IV marries Warbeck to his cousin. Maximilian of Austria recognizes him officially. Even some English nobles waver. How does Elizabeth react when confronted with a man claiming to be her dead brother? Does she believe Warbeck actually is Richard? Hope he is, or fear he is? She says nothing publicly, but privately she probably knows the truth. Her brothers died in 1483, and Perkin Warbeck is either a fraud or madman. The Pretender crisis finally ends 1499, when Henry executes both Warbeck and real Edward, Earl of Warwick. Elizabeth watches her husband kill the last Plantagenet male, ending the bloodline that ruled England for centuries. Necessary for Tudor security, but it weighs on both consciences. Elizabeth helped create this dynasty. Now she watches it destroy everyone who came before.
April 2nd, 1502. News arrives at Greenwich Palace like thunderbolt. Prince Arthur, heir to the throne, is dead at 15. Sweating sickness took him at Ludlow Castle, along with young wife Catherine of Aragon. Elizabeth and Henry's world collapses. Contemporary accounts describe what happens next. Henry VII breaks down completely, weeping like child. This man who conquered England through pure willpower cannot cope with losing firstborn son. Elizabeth holds herself together long enough to comfort her husband. She reminds him they still have Prince Henry, still have daughters, still have time for more children. Only later, alone in chambers, does she collapse in grief. But Arthur's death changes everything about Tudor dynasty. Suddenly, 11-year-old Prince Henry is heir to the throne. Elizabeth realizes she needs to prepare this boy for kingship decades early. She throws herself into Henry's education with desperate intensity, hires best tutors in Europe, teaches him languages, music, theology, statecraft, shows him how to charm courtiers, read political situations, project royal authority. But most importantly, she loves him. In an age when royal children are raised by servants, Elizabeth takes personal responsibility for Henry's upbringing. She spends hours with him daily, sharing meals, overseeing lessons, listening to thoughts and dreams. For Henry, this is everything. He doesn't just see a mother, he sees perfection. But Elizabeth makes one crucial mistake raising Henry VIII, something turning him into the monster who beheads wives and terrorizes England. At 36, Elizabeth becomes pregnant again. Dangerous. She's already borne 6 children, each pregnancy riskier. But dynasty needs more sons. Arthur is dead. Henry is one accident from ending Tudor line. Pregnancy progresses normally until February 1603. Elizabeth goes into labor at the Tower of London on February 2nd. Elizabeth hopes this daughter brings blessing. Instead, she brings tragedy. Baby Catherine lives only 9 days. Worse, Elizabeth develops puerperal fever, bacterial infection killing many new mothers. Medieval medicine can do nothing. For 9 days, Elizabeth fights for life in the same tower where her brothers disappeared 20 years earlier. Henry VII brings England's best physicians, but they're helpless against infection. Young Prince Henry presses ear to mother's door, listening to screams. No one explains what's happening. No one prepares him. February 11th, 1503. Her 37th birthday, Elizabeth of York dies. The boy who'll become Henry VIII just lost the only person who'll ever love him perfectly. He's 12, and his world ended. Elizabeth's greatest gift and her greatest mistake was the same. She loved Henry without limits.
She told him he was special, destined, chosen. She gave him the kind of love that never says no. So when death took her away, it left a wound no crown could heal. Henry VII is devastated by Elizabeth's death, becomes reclusive, paranoid, and obsessed with hoarding money. Warmth disappears from the Tudor court. Without Elizabeth's softening influence, Henry VII grows harsh and suspicious. Father and son grieve differently. Henry VII withdraws from the world. Young Prince Henry throws himself into physical pursuits, jousting, hunting, dancing, music, anything to avoid thoughts of his mother's death. But at night, alone in chambers, future Henry VIII weeps for the woman who made him feel like the center of the universe. He'll spend the next 46 years trying to make another woman love him that way.
Elizabeth is buried beside her father, Edward IV, at Windsor Castle. She chose simple resting place over magnificent tomb Henry VII later builds. Even in death, humble and reverent, motto she lived by. But her true monument isn't stone. It's the dynasty she created and the peace she brought England. The Tudor rose, red and white entwined, becomes England's symbol. Her daughter Margaret's marriage to James IV unites England and Scotland generations later. Her son, Henry VIII, turns England into a European power, and her great-granddaughter, Elizabeth I, rules for 45 years, carrying the crown Elizabeth herself never wore. Was she a saint or a strategist? Both. She healed a nation through love, but also through calculation. She appeared submissive, yet guided Henry VII from behind closed doors. She raised her son to believe in divine right, but gave him a love so perfect he could never find it again. Elizabeth of York, daughter of a king, sister of lost princes, wife of a conqueror, mother of a tyrant, grandmother of England's greatest queen. She ended war with a marriage. She created a dynasty from grief. She planted a rose that still blooms today.
If this story of betrayal and broken promises surprised you, there's so much more to discover about Elizabeth of York's incredible life. Hit the like button if you learned something new about Tudor history, and subscribe for more untold stories about the queens and kings who shaped England. Let me know in the comments, was Elizabeth loyal to Henry out of love, or did fear and duty keep her silent, even when he killed her cousin to secure his crown?